Hi, I'm Sarah Foster. Thank you for joining me today. In my house growing up, cheese blintzes and noodle kugel were staple foods of a Jewish holiday. We ate these along with bagels, lox, and cream cheese as part of our Yom Kippur break fast. For me as a child, the dairy holiday was always Yom Kippur break fast and not Shavuot. Though I came to learn through my continued Jewish learning that dairy on Shavuot was more traditional. I learned a bit about Shavuot as a child, but it was all about receiving Torah, and the only ritual element for me was the connection to confirmation. The idea that our people had accepted Torah, and that this was another opportunity for young people to do the same. Given that for me, blintzes and kugel were breakfast foods, and Shavuot had very little ritual significance and no connection to blintzes or kugel, when I started learning more about the custom of eating dairy on Shavuot, I wondered how this custom came about. At one point, someone told me that it had to do with the story of Yael and Sisera, that we eat dairy to commemorate the fact that Yael lured Sisera to sleep with milk, and then was able to kill him and save the Jewish people. What, I wondered, did that have to do with Shavuot? We read from the book of Ruth, not Judges, on Shavuot. And there doesn't seem to be any other clear connection between this story and this holiday. So I kept looking and I kept asking. Someone else told me that I was close, but that it was Judith and not Yael. Judith lured Holofernes to sleep with wine and cheese, and then killed him, also thereby saving the Jewish people. But this story seemed even less connected to Shavuot. In fact, it's part of the Hanukkah story. So I kept looking, and I found 4 other explanations, all of which made a lot more sense to me than Yael and Judith. Perhaps you like the Yael and Judith stories, and that's great. But I will leave it to you to consider these other 4 explanations and decide for yourself if any of them are more satisfactory. Shavuot commemorates the Jewish people's acceptance of receiving Torah. Moses spent 40 days on Mount Sinai getting Torah from God for the Jewish people. But what does that have to do with dairy? There's a concept in Hebrew called gematria. It is the numerological system developed by Kabbalists, Jewish mystics. In this system, each Hebrew letter is assigned a numerical value. The value of the letters in a word can be added together to help us better understand the deeper meanings of words and concepts in Torah, and can show us how seemingly unconnected concepts might secretly be connected. The Hebrew word for milk is chalav, chet, lamed, vet. The numerical value associated with chet is 8, the numerical value for lamed is 30, and the numerical value of vet is 2. When we add 8 plus 30 plus 2, we get 40. The same number of days Moses spent on Mount Sinai. This seems, therefore, to be a satisfactory explanation for why we eat dairy on Shavuot. The second reason also has to do with the Hebrew word for milk. This explanation connects to the maftir, the concluding section of the Torah portion that we read on Shavuot. The maftir begins with Numbers 28:26. Uvayom habikurim behakrivchem mincha chadasha ladonai b'shavuotechem mikra kodesh yihyeh lachem kol melechet avodah lo ta'asu. The 5th, 6th, and 7th words of this verse, Chadasha ladonai b'shavuotechem, create an acronym for the word chalav. This verse is describing a mincha sacrifice that we are supposed to start offering. And these words describe the sacrifice. It is supposed to be a new sacrifice, chadasha. It is made to God, ladonai, and it is made in our weeks, b'shavuotechem. What better way to make this new Shavuot sacrifice to God than with dairy, chalav, the acronym which describes the sacrifice itself? The third reason for eating dairy on Shavuot uses both the word chalav and a metaphor, but is perhaps a clearer connection as we do not have to transform the words in any way. We can read the entire Exodus story as a metaphor for the birth process. The Maharal of Prague, a 16th century Jewish scholar, mystic, and philosopher, wrote in reference to Midrash Tehillim, "When Israel was in Egypt, and the Holy One, blessed is God, took them out, they were surely like a fetus which had been born, as it is stated in Midrash." To explain this idea a bit more clearly, we can understand that the blood of the Pesach sacrifice is the lifeblood of the womb. We can understand the word Mitzrayim as both Egypt and narrow place as the birth canal. We can understand the crossing of the Sea of Reeds as the breaking of the water. As we continue this metaphor, we receive Torah, the mother's milk, which is meant to sustain and nourish us. We can also see this idea of Torah being nourishing like milk in Song of Songs 4:11. "Sweetness of Torah drops from your lips, O bride, honey and milk are under your tongue, and the scent of your robes is like the scent of Lebanon." The connection between the blood of the Pesach sacrifice and the blood of the womb, and the connection between Torah and a mother's milk, is also strengthened by looking at the Babylonian Talmud, Bechorot 6b, which states, the milk originates from the blood, which is forbidden for consumption, as the master said, that the reason a nursing woman does not experience menstruation is because the blood is spoiled and becomes milk. While we know today that breast milk is not actually spoiled blood, and that breastfeeding does not necessarily directly correlate to not menstruating, it is clear that after giving birth, most women produce milk, at least for a little while. Therefore, Shavuot marks the moment where we are now nourished by God's milk, the words of Torah. This is the clear next step in the birth story of the Jewish people. In recognition of this, we continue to eat dairy at this time to remind ourselves of the idea that Torah, which we commemorate receiving, is God's milk and nourishes us. One final explanation is perhaps the most practical. Shavuot commemorates, as we have said, the moment that we accepted Torah. When we did this, we became obligated to all of the laws, including the laws of kashrut, for the first time. Prior to this moment, the Israelites did not know what kosher slaughter meant or looked like. They were out in the wilderness. They couldn't stop by Heinen's or Boris's and get kosher meat. They needed to take time to create the tools and slaughter the animals according to the new laws. If they wanted to eat according to the new laws they had just accepted, they were going to eat a dairy meal. In commemoration of that, we continue to eat a dairy meal on this holiday. 4 different plausible explanations for why we eat dairy on the holiday of Shavuot. One from Gematria, connected to the time of Moses was on Mount Sinai receiving Torah. One for the acronym drawn out of the special maftir on this holiday. One, a metaphor for the birth story of our people. And one, a very practical and timely explanation. While I'm not going to give up my family custom of breaking Yom Kippur fast with blintzes and kugel, I know that this year my Shavuot meal will also include these delicious Jewish staples. And as I sit down to eat them at this time of year, I will consider these different explanations. I hope that you will also have the opportunity to enjoy one of these Jewish dairy treats this year, and that as you eat them, you too will consider the reasoning and meaning behind why we eat them on this particular holiday. Chag Sameach.